The world knew him as the King, a polite Southern gentleman who charmed millions with a swivel of his hips and a curl of his lip. To the public, Elvis Presley was an icon of untouchable cool. But that was the image, carefully polished by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Behind the rhinestone jumpsuits and the blinding flashbulbs, a different story was unfolding. The King of Rock and Roll harbored some surprisingly strong feelings about his musical contemporaries. While Colonel Parker worked to maintain the flawless facade of the universally adored idol, the truth was more complicated. These weren't just simple dislikes, they were complex rivalries, fueled by professional jealousy, political differences, and clashes over the very soul of music itself. So, get ready, because this is the story of the 6 legendary singers and the intense rivalries that put them on Elvis Presley's bad side. Kicking off our list are 2 singers who represented an entire style that Elvis seemed to reject on a primal level. The polished, traditional pop crooners, specifically Mel Torme and Robert Goulet. This wasn't about chart battles or stolen girlfriends, at least not entirely. It was a clash of styles. Mel Torme, the Velvet Fog, and Robert Goulet, the Broadway baritone, were the sound of the establishment. Their vocals were technically perfect, sophisticated, and controlled. Elvis was the opposite, raw energy, primal, and unpredictable. His inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, said Elvis found that polished style to be passionless, all technique and no soul. This dislike is immortalized in one of rock's greatest legends. The story goes that Elvis was at home watching TV when Robert Goulet appeared on screen. Without a word, Elvis picked up a pistol and shot the television, silencing Goulet. Mid-note. Now this wasn't as personal as it sounds. Goulet himself later confirmed the story but laughed it off, saying he and Elvis were friends. He even joked, "He shot out Mel Torme, he shot out Frank Sinatra, but I get all the credit." It wasn't about one man, but the whole passionless style he felt they represented. Still, one of Elvis's friends, Marty Lacker, claimed there might have been a more personal reason. He alleged that one of Elvis's girlfriends, Anita Wood, had performed with Goulet, who then sent a suggestive note to Elvis implying he was taking care of her. Whether that's true or not, shooting the TV was a clear message. It was a symbolic act, a bullet fired not just at a screen, but at an entire era of music he felt was devoid of the fire he held so dear. At number 5 is a far more complex relationship, one tangled with both admiration and frustration. Bob Dylan. On one hand, Elvis Presley genuinely respected Bob Dylan as a songwriter. He was a true music lover and recognized the genius in Dylan's lyrics. In 1966, Elvis proved it by recording a stunning version of Dylan's "Tomorrow is a Long Time." The performance is a masterpiece and shows a deep respect for Dylan the writer. Dylan himself treasured the cover, calling it the highlight of his career. But while he loved the poet, Elvis reportedly couldn't stand the singer. According to his inner circle, Elvis would privately mock Dylan's nasal, talk-singing delivery. To Elvis, a great voice was an instrument of power and beauty. Dylan's voice to him wasn't musical. The clash was fundamental. Elvis was a vocalist, while Dylan was a storyteller who used his voice as a vehicle for his words. This frustration might have also come from a place of insecurity. As Dylan was hailed as the voice of a generation, some close to Elvis said he felt his own career looked shallow in comparison. Dylan, for his part, idolized the early, rebellious Elvis, but was disillusioned by the movie star version of the
60s. He famously said, hearing him for the first time was like busting out of jail, but later turned down chances to meet him, wanting to remember the powerful, mystical Elvis, who, in his eyes, was gone, had left the building.
This wasn't hate, but a complicated mix of respect and artistic disagreement that placed Dylan firmly on Elvis's list of frustrations. Number 4 represents a true clash of titans, a generational battle for the soul of American pop music. This was the Cold War between the King of Rock and Roll and the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra. When Elvis exploded onto the scene, Sinatra was the undisputed king. Then came rock and roll, and Sinatra despised it. In a 1957 article, he launched a blistering attack, calling the genre the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression, and music for cretinous goons. It was a declaration of war from the old guard. For Elvis, this public dismissal from an icon was a deep, personal insult. But in the world of showbiz, business trumps all. In 1960, after Elvis's return, his manager arranged a TV special to welcome him home, hosted by none other than Frank Sinatra. On screen, they were pros, even duetting on Witchcraft and Love Me Tender. Behind the scenes, the tension remained. Though Sinatra's daughter, Nancy, insisted they became friends, and Frank expressed sadness at Elvis's death. Others in Elvis's camp said the rivalry never truly faded. Sinatra may have eventually warmed to Elvis the man, but his initial public condemnation of the music that defined Elvis left a scar. It was a rivalry born of contempt, a clash between the tuxedo and the leather jacket, and for Elvis, it was a slight he wouldn't forget. The third name on our list involves a conflict that wasn't about style or ego. It was about business, principle, and a clash between two fiercely independent artists, Dolly Parton. The story centers on one of the most beloved songs ever, I Will Always Love You. Dolly had written and recorded it, and by 1974, Elvis had heard it and wanted to record his own version. Dolly was thrilled. Having the biggest star on the planet cover your song was a dream come true. She was even told Elvis sang it to Priscilla after their divorce. Everything was set until Colonel Tom Parker called. He informed Dolly that it was standard practice for Elvis to receive half of the publishing rights for any song he recorded. Dolly, a savvy businesswoman even then, was stunned.
Giving away half the publishing rights meant giving away half of her song's future earnings forever. She was faced with an impossible choice. In an act of incredible foresight, she said no. As she later explained, "I can't give you the publishing."
I wanted to hear Elvis sing it, and it broke my heart. I cried all night, but I had to keep that copyright in my pocket. The issue was never with Elvis himself, but with the exploitative business practices of his management. For Dolly, it was a quiet rebellion, a declaration that her art was hers alone, a decision that would ultimately make her millions and draw a firm line between her own independence and the gilded cage of the king. At number 2, we have a rivalry that was pure, primal rock and roll, born in the same Memphis studio, the explosive feud between Elvis and the killer, Jerry Lee Lewis. They both came from Sun Records, but their paths diverged. Elvis was groomed for mainstream stardom, the polite rebel. Jerry Lee, on the other hand, was an arrogant, piano-pounding wild man who believed he, not Elvis, was the true king. The professional jealousy was thick. An engineer at Sun claimed Elvis felt Jerry Lee's wild act was turning rock and roll into a circus act. This long-simmering rivalry reached its bizarre peak on November 23, 1976. A heavily intoxicated Jerry Lee Lewis drove his Lincoln Continental to the gates of Graceland, demanding to see Elvis. Watching on his security cameras, Elvis told his guard to call the police. When they arrived, they found a ranting Jerry Lee and a loaded .38 caliber pistol on his dashboard. He was arrested, and his defiant mugshot became legendary. Accounts of that night vary. Jerry Lee claimed Elvis had invited him over, but the police report and Elvis's reaction tell a different story. It was the chaotic culmination of a 2-decade power struggle. For Elvis, the incident was the final word, cementing Jerry Lee's place near the top of his list of rivals. And now, at number 1, the most intense and politically charged rivalry of Elvis's life. This wasn't just about music. It was a culture. War against a phenomenon he felt threatened his crown and his country. The Beatles. In the beginning, the Beatles revered Elvis. John Lennon famously said, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." A meeting was finally arranged in 1965 at Elvis's Bel Air home, but it was notoriously awkward. Aboard, Elvis reportedly told the star-struck Beatles, "If you guys are just going to sit there and stare at me, I'm going to bed." The awkwardness soon soured into resentment, at least for Elvis. As the British invasion swept America, the Beatles didn't just top the charts, they changed the culture. Their music grew more complex, and they became vocal opponents of the Vietnam War. Elvis, a patriot who had proudly served in the army, began to see them as an anti-American force. It was John Lennon who drew most of his ire. Lennon's anti-war activism and sharp wit were everything the Southern authority-respecting king despised. This private resentment boiled over on December 21, 1970, when Elvis arranged a meeting with President Richard Nixon at the White House. The famous photo of their handshake hides a darker purpose. According to White House memos, Elvis told Nixon that the Beatles had been a real force for anti-American spirit because they made their money in the U.S. and then promoted an anti-American theme back in England. It was an extraordinary moment, the king of rock and roll complaining about his biggest rivals to the President of the United States. The feeling, in a way, was mutual. As Elvis became a Las Vegas spectacle, Lennon became openly critical, viewing him as a shadow of his former rebellious self. This was more than a feud. It was a clash